This week, I'm excited to welcome Jason Romano, executive producer of Sports Spectrum and creator of the popular Sports Spectrum podcast. Before joining Sports Spectrum, Jason spent 17 years at ESPN as an Emmy Award-winning producer and senior manager, producing content for some of the network's biggest shows, including SportsCenter, NFL Live, Mike and Mike, Sunday NFL Countdown, First Take, GameDay, and Outside the Lines. But one of my favorite moments in our conversations when Jason talks about how an interaction with Hall of Fame coach Tony Dungy challenged him to think differently about his faith. Coach Dungy asked him a simple but life-changing question: how are you living out your faith where God has you right now? And that conversation became a turning point in his life and helped shape the path that eventually led him from ESPN into his current role. If you're a coach, leader, athlete, or anyone striving just to make a difference where you are right now, this conversation will challenge and encourage you. The podcast
and we use
we're rolling through.
So this is great. Yeah.
Yeah. It's been fun. The first guest was Bob Starkey, and I'd worked with him, associate head coach at LSU. The second one was Brendan Suhr, who started with Dick Vitale, his first job out of college. And it's funny, there's a theme without thinking about it. And then our third guy just dropped this past week. He's a former Division I player and a retired Navy SEAL. And you start to see parallels come out from their faith to that character arc. And but the one theme that kind of kept coming out was this connection between, and it wasn't meant to be, but the sports and their faith, and how they connect it, and then how when they're in alignment, and then when they get out of alignment, what that looks like. And just to throw that out to you, I know the Sports Spectrum, and that's part of the mission, is where those two things connect. Can you talk about that for just a second?
Yeah. So the intersection of sports and faith is kind of the motto that Sports Spectrum goes by. And, I've been there since February of 2017, so almost 10 years. And the motto has been the same. The goal, the mission has been the same, which is to continue to point people to Jesus. We're just using sports as a way to do that. We'll say sports and faith, but what we really mean is sports and Jesus. And it's been wonderful to kind of highlight the stories of athletes and coaches and other people in the world of sports who have a genuine relationship with Jesus, or even just believe in God and really want to express their faith publicly in a way that's, uncommon, I guess you would say. We want to be able to, tell that story, highlight that story, but ultimately what we're trying to do is ultimately point people to Jesus. And if sports can be the way to do that, that's what we're doing. We're all in. Let's just say that. We're all in.
What was growing up like the role of sports in your life?
It was everything. I mean, I was not a follower of Jesus growing up, so I was a follower of sports. My God was sports, and if you were saying, what are you a follower of, I would have said I'm a sports follower. I certainly wasn't a Christ follower. So it played a huge role. I always say out of the womb, I was watching sports and, played sports all throughout my childhood: Little League baseball, played football in the backyard, basketball at the hoop at my grandparents' house. I watched all of the main three sports: football, baseball, and basketball. My first love watching was football, but my first love playing was baseball. And then as I got a little bit older, I started to really take basketball as a sport and enjoy that. But it's everything. I mean, even to this day, right behind me is a picture of Larry Bird. That's 10-year-old Jason's favorite player, 14-year-old Jason's favorite player. And so my childhood shaped everything that I am about who I am today as far as a sports fan goes. Darryl Strawberry, who is a friend of mine now, ironically, but was my favorite baseball player as a kid with the New York Mets. So any of those guys, they were heroes to me. And, fighting for the newspaper to get the sports section with my brother as a kid growing up, wanting to read the sports page, watching all the games, keeping notebooks with stats. As a teenager.
Yes.
Greg, come on. That's what we didn't have the internet, and we didn't have computers or anything or phones. So I grabbed a notebook and I would, grab the newspaper and start keeping track on what they were doing. And
my mom found some of my old notebooks like that. I grew up in Kentucky, so I was statting just in case they didn't have enough stats. I made sure I had my own copy of them. But yes, I also remember hitting play and record on our cassette deck to record Kaywood Ledford calling the game so I could listen to it when I was playing on my Nerf Go.
Amazing. I had a VCR. So when I was 10 years old, I got a VCR, and cassette tapes of games were recorded and watched and rewatched for hours at a time, where I could tell you to this day those games that I rewatched, I could tell you who played, close to what the score was, how many points, what the big play was, at what point did it happen, just because I watched them over and over. I wish that, I could understand like what film study was like as a coach, but I'm guessing that's kind of what it was. I was just a fan and I would watch these same highlights and games over and over. So
Well, I blew my both boys' minds talking about we were watching the playoffs and talking about watching the playoffs with the Lakers and the Celtics, and they were delayed. You had to watch them at 11:30 after the news.
yeah.
Then you could record it, and they had no concept of what that was like.
Yeah, different time. We'll say
Yeah.
that for sure. So
Well, on that note, so I grew up as a Christ follower, but sports was my God.
okay.
So I started off early out of you were aligned because you said that was the one thing. I was out of alignment from the get-go, and
Sure.
then go from playing to college to coaching to today and still fight. And now you fight as a parent a little bit of making sure that you don't transfer those things to your kids. As you talk to coaches and athletes and in your business, how do you talk about that alignment? How do you describe that alignment?
Yeah, I think it's the number one struggle that every single person I've talked to will mention. It's really a focus of identity. It's a common word that we use. It's a kind of a buzzword, especially in the Christian circles. But with these athletes and coaches, it's everything, because you and I as fans, I just mentioned Larry Bird, right? To me, Larry Bird, the identity I have of Larry Bird is Boston Celtics legend, Hall of Famer, right? But I don't know who Larry Bird the person is. But if Larry Bird doesn't know who Larry Bird the person is, he's going to jump in and say, I'm Larry Bird, the NBA basketball player with the Boston Celtics. And that's a real struggle for the athletes that we talk to, because everybody is admiring them, cheering them on, buying their jerseys, criticizing them, right? Because of what they do. And, I've struggled with that, and I'm not an athlete, but I mean, I've struggled working in the sports media world, even in sports ministry for years, is I have to be very mindful that I am not what I do. I am a follower of Jesus Christ, and these athletes will say the same thing. I am a follower of Jesus, but it can get out of whack. Like you said, it happened for you growing up really quickly. If you buy into the lie that your value and your worth comes from what you do in your work, and everybody knows you, if you're an athlete or a coach, by the value of what you do. If you're a coach, wins and losses. Did you win a championship? Did you do well? Did you get a lot of victories this year? Did you go far in the tournament? Did you win some games in the playoffs? If you're an athlete, how many home runs did you hit? How many strikeouts did you get? How many points did you score in the game? How many touchdowns did you get? Did your team win? It's all about achievement and approval from your team, your coaches, the front office. Everything is about that. And it's a complete opposite of what the gospel is. The gospel is centered focusedly on what Jesus has already done for you. So there is nothing you or I can do to earn the way into being a follower of Jesus. And that's really hard, especially in the sports space, for those that are earning every single thing that they try and do in every other realm of what they do. And suddenly saying, wait, I don't have to do anything to earn this faith. I don't have to be a better person or a good person, or check more boxes to be
Where's the scorecard?
accepted. Yeah, where's the scorecard? What's my batting average with Jesus, right? And it's like, no, the batting average is 100 based upon the cross and what Jesus did for us.
How do you, and identity is huge. How do you, I'm trying to figure out how to daily keep that in front of you to make sure, and I'll give you an example. We play on Saturday afternoon, Saturday evening, and lose. And it was tough going to church the next day because you feel like a loser. Now, the other irony there is that, we go to a pretty good sized church. Nobody cared. I mean, I felt like they cared, but really they didn't. It was still Greg. And then it would cause me not to talk to people because I was afraid that they would think I was, and you go down this whole rabbit hole of identity, and in the back of your mind that this is stupid, but I still would stay out of alignment at times and have to keep fighting. How do you bring yourself back, or how do you teach others to bring yourself back?
Well, I always say, at least for the role that I have, which currently works with Sports Spectrum, and I'm an executive producer and I work on podcasts and things like that, I have to be very mindful not to let the work that I do for Jesus replace my relationship with Jesus, to be very mindful of that. And I know when that gets out of whack because maybe I didn't read my Bible for a few days. Maybe I didn't be disciplined in my time in prayer in the morning. Maybe I missed a prayer night, which I did this week, and it was for a good reason, but I still missed it, and I wasn't happy that I missed it. And those things, the more you kind of push those to the side, the more you're going to see your identity start to creep into the what you do. And for me, I do my very best. I'm not perfect at it, obviously, nobody is, but to really set time in my relationship with Jesus first. And so if you're an athlete, and maybe you don't work in a Christian or for a Christian organization, you work for, or play for, the Dallas Cowboys or something, you have to still prioritize your relationship with Jesus. So if you go to chapel or if you are in a Bible study that week, man, those things are great, but those can't replace your relationship with Jesus. And your identity ultimately is not found in you going to a Bible study or going to chapel. Your identity is found in Christ. And so that relationship is a vertical, one-on-one personal relationship with him. And if anything it replaces that, even good things, well, those good things, if they become God things, are actually not great things at all. They're bad things. And so that's where I kind of lean to tell others. And that's where I try to be disciplined in my own places. All right, did I spend time with the Lord when I woke up? First hour, at least 35 minutes to an hour, I want to spend with him. And then did I get my Bible time in? Make sure I'm reading his word, because that's where he truly speaks to us, I believe, is when we open up his word. And then am I in church as much as I can be? And I'm in there. It's a non-negotiable for us and my family to go to church on Sunday. Unless we're on vacation or have some kind of family emergency or something, right? So like those things are daily disciplines, weekly disciplines that I try to instill. But nothing can replace that. And even the good things that we try to replace with our relationship with God can really hinder it if we're not careful.
Well, I was just thinking of the screw tape letters there for a little bit, that the things that he let him down were good, could be good things. Going to church is a good thing. Going to class is a good thing. And if you let that get in the way of the relationship, he's distracted us. And that's, even though these good things, they're still not nurturing the relationship. And that's where the alignment comes from.
It's just an order thing, right? I mean, if those good things replace God, well, then it's Matthew 6:33 backwards, right? But in Matthew 6, Jesus says, seek first the kingdom of God, and everything else flows from that. And that's where we really need to be thinking about is, okay, did I make sure I prioritize, if I'm going to call this the most important thing in my life, is it really? Is it really? Because am I spending 20 minutes with God and then 23 hours and 40 minutes doing everything else? Well, that doesn't sound like it's the most important thing. It actually sounds like it's the least important thing in your life. So it's really, and I'm speaking to myself when I say that to you, Greg.
Oh, yeah. No. Same way.
I'm preaching to me here because I have to constantly be thinking, all right, Lord, if I'm going to call you that, Lord, I gotta have this relationship with you and make you Lord of my life.
We just, I teach a post-college class at our church, and we just finished Colossians. And the thing that stood out for me along the lines you're talking about is that Paul is writing to a group and talks about how thankful and how much he prays for a group that he never met in person.
Mm-hmm.
I was like, I have a hard enough time praying for people that I see on a daily basis. And here he is with such a mindset that he was that concerned about a group of people that he had never met. And again, you can only do that through the relationship that he had with Christ. So to dig a little deeper on the relationship part right there, in your book, The Uniform of Leadership, which I kept going back to looking at that title because I was thinking of all the cliches that we've used, that you play for the name on the front of the jersey, or you don't even have your name on the back of the jersey. And you can go down that whole cliche list. But talk about, you said the front carries the team name and the back carries your name. Talk about the balance of those two things.
Yeah, I mean, I'll go first to scripture and I'll look at what Jesus said. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength. Love your neighbor as yourself. And so as we think about that mindset every day of loving God first, loving others as we would love ourselves, it doesn't say love your neighbor and not yourself. And I think we mess that up sometimes as Christians, is we think, oh, because Jesus said he must increase and I must decrease, that means that I must completely be non-existent. And that's not the case. I think Jesus wants us to have some self-care, if you will, and some self-love. But in the uniform of leadership model, the idea is if you're wearing a jersey, the front is who you represent. The back can also be who you represent. But what would that look like if you put the name on the back of the jersey on the front? It would look a little out of whack, right? It would look backwards. And so my mindset in writing this book was, wait, the best leaders that I've met, both in sports and even in business, always put others first. And I would even say, if you're a follower of Christ, you can add, love the Lord your God with all your heart. So put God first, and then others second, and then yourself third. So you're not taking yourself out of the equation, you're just putting it in the proper order. And when our self is first, and then maybe others second, God third, or whatever order you want to put it in, it's out of whack. It's out of the way that God has intended us to do our lives as followers of Christ. It's a proper order. I actually learned this from the college that my daughter went to school. You might have heard of it, Indiana Wesleyan.
I just wrote down I am third. Yep.
Yes. And that's actually, I think it's in chapter 1 or 2, the very early part of the book. When I met Greg Tonigal, the head coach at Indiana Wesleyan in 2018, and then I met Jeff Clark, his longtime assistant, and they've become great friends of mine since. Those guys introduced me to the I am third model. And I said, what is that? They said, God first, others second, ourselves third. And I thought, that's a model that you teach? I mean, it seems like the way we should live as followers of Christ. He's like, yeah, why would I change that with the way that I coach? So if I coach this model of putting the Lord first, they are a Christian school, obviously, and then putting others second. So in a team format, when you're trying to build a team and have success, man, you better be playing for each other. And then yourself third. It doesn't mean you're not caring about how you do and you want to care about yourself, but it's got to be in the right order, because if you play for yourself first, which is what the world might tell you to do, now you become so selfish and self-centered and egotistical that all these other things don't really matter. And unfortunately, you see that in a lot of sports avenues, and it's tough to watch because those people that are playing for themselves usually stand out in a way where you're just like, they don't get it. They don't get it. So that model of I am third, yeah, I don't want to say I ripped it off. I borrowed it from my friends at Indiana Wesleyan, and we just turned it into what the uniform of leadership is all about.
Well, again, we keep going back to these same three priorities right there, and going with the identity. So on that note, I guess ESPN is a dream job for a lot of people, and for you. I was fortunate enough to be in 2 national championship games, and getting there, it's so wild of how quick it seems like such a rush, and then it's over.
Mm.
And you walk off the floor and it's like, well, I mean, that was fun, but it doesn't satisfy. And I guess it's insatiable to some part, but it does leave that empty part right there. Is that what you felt when you made your transition from ESPN to Sports Spectrum, or how did that come about?
Yeah, it's interesting because I grew up loving sports. So if you told me at 12 years old that I would work at ESPN someday, I would have said, you're crazy. That's amazing. That would be the equivalent of playing for the Dallas Cowboys or playing for the Mets, right? Like, to me, if I wasn't going to be a professional athlete, the next best thing would be to go to the worldwide leader in sports and work around sports and talk about sports every single day. And somehow the Lord made that possible. When I got there, I was not a Christian. But when I started working there about a year in is when I first began to say yes to Jesus. And I gave my life to him, with a lot of construction work between then and now, we'll just say. But early on, I became a follower of Christ 1 year into my tenure at ESPN. So now I was trying to navigate what those two worlds look like. And for many years, ESPN was my God. I still went to church and I'm still growing and understanding who Jesus is, but my priorities weren't Christ. My priority was my job, my wife, and eventually my daughter being born. And it became all consuming for me. And I think there was a pivot point in 2010 where I met Tony Dungy. He came to ESPN, the great head coach, NFL Pro Football Hall of Fame coach. And he's the one that really helped me understand my identity had to be in Christ first. Some of the things we just talked about. And so for the last 6 or 7 years at ESPN that I was there, I was able to understand that ESPN was in fact a ministry field for me. And it wasn't my God. My God was Jesus. And that I would go in to serve him every day with the work that I do at ESPN. And I still loved it. Like, by the way, it was so much fun, right? It was a lot of work and a lot of pressure in many cases and a lot to deliver on, but it was a great place to work. And I so enjoyed being paid money to watch sports. Like, come on, who wouldn't do that for a career? And it was a great job to have. But somewhere around 2015, so 11 years ago, I started to have a nudge in my spirit to just do more for the Lord. And I didn't know what that meant. Ultimately, it meant being more connected in my local church and really stepping up and joining the leadership board there and becoming an elder at my church. So I started to say yes to some things that I just didn't think I was qualified for or ready for in the church space.
Was that
And
intentional when you said you started to say yes? Had you had those opportunities before and pushed them away, or did they just start seeing these opportunities now?
no, I just started, I guess, just as I've felt my relationship with the Lord growing, maybe I just started stepping into some spaces and conversations with people that, because when they came to me, side note here, when they came to me to ask me to be on the elder board and be on the leadership board at my church, I was blown away because it came out of nowhere to me and I was not expecting it. And my pastor, my late pastor, who's since passed away, said to me, Pastor Joe, this is a unanimous decision. All 7 of the people on the elder board brought your name up and said you would be an amazing elder. And I said, what? I said, I don't know enough about the Bible. I'm not, seasoned. I don't know. I've never preached before. What are you talking about? And yet it was right in that moment a couple days earlier where I said to my wife, I feel too comfortable in my faith. I don't know what that means, but I'm feeling really comfortable. Like we have a good thing going to church, a good thing with the job I have, with raising our daughter to be in. We have a good thing going. I think it needs to get uncomfortable somehow. And I shouldn't have said that out loud because now I had to be held accountable to that when my pastor comes to me 3-4 days later and says, we want you to be on the elder board. And then a year later, I tell my pastor, hey, I'm starting to feel like maybe my time at ESPN might be coming to an end. I don't know what that means. It feels crazy to even say that out loud, but it's a nudge because it didn't make any sense, right? Like, why would I want to leave a place that I've been for 15 plus years and you get to talk about sports and work in sports every day? But my faith was growing. And I think the Lord sometimes, nudges us into directions and places to really seek him first of all, and to grow in him, but then to see where he might be stretching us and taking us to. So over the next year, Greg, which was a tough year initially at ESPN for me, just wasn't seeing eye to eye with my boss, wasn't really satisfied with my work. I started to seek the Lord a lot more for where he wanted me to go. I get called up, but I got moved to a show called Mike and Mike in the Morning in my last year at ESPN. I had previously worked on that show very early in my career. And here's an opportunity to come back as this show is really at the top of its game. It's probably one of the most popular shows ever at ESPN, much less at that time when it was really, really doing well. And I thought, okay, this might be a great opportunity to try something at ESPN. And I loved my time on Mike and Mike. It was my favorite year working at ESPN was my last year. But don't you know, Greg, every day I just felt in the spirit, like your time's coming up. Your time's, this isn't going to be a long term here. I still want you to do more for me. Those are kind of the things I was hearing in my spirit, not an audible voice
Did
from
you
the
want to
Lord.
fight that feeling or that
Yeah.
nudge? Or
Oh yeah. Yeah. I was fighting it because especially with ESPN and with Mike and Mike, I was having so much fun. But as I'm fighting this nudge, I think it was more clarity for me that this was coming from God and not from me because it just didn't make sense.
because it didn't make sense. Yeah.
When you're wanting to leave a place that you're having the most fun you've ever had working, that doesn't make any sense, right? So why would you leave? So all I did was, first of all, I sought the Lord and I would pray a lot for clarity and direction. But then I just started meeting and calling people that I respected that were away from ESPN, some pastors. I got to build up a nice little connection, I've called it a Rolodex, whatever you want to call it, of people in my world through social media and other places that I've met. So I got to meet some really great authors and speakers. And I called up a bunch of them and I would leave Mike and Mike, at 1:00 in the afternoon and go home and go for a walk and scheduled 30 minutes every week or every other week with somebody and just ask them their story and then ask them if they thought I was crazy that I was getting this nudge from the Lord to leave ESPN because I figured you get some confirmation from people. If they're all saying you're completely nuts, don't do it. And they didn't, not any of them. In fact, they were very encouraging. They would pray with me, pray for me. And, two things happened in that seeking of the Lord. Number one was my first book came about, which was Live to Forgive. And the second thing was this opportunity to connect with my current boss, Steve Stenstrom, who's the president of Pro Athletes Outreach and Sports Spectrum. And we started talking, and I wasn't necessarily looking for a job, but the more he was talking to me about Sports Spectrum, the more I realized, okay, this is media, it's sports, and it's even more than that, it's Jesus. This aligns very much on where my focus is right now. And I was 41 years old at the time, 42. And so we just started having conversations. And that's what I always encourage people. If you're feeling a nudge from the Lord, start talking to a few people that are trusted and just see where that might go. Because my pastor was the best at this when he said to me, you got the bug and you love Jesus, and he's going to take you places that you're going to be blown away from. So lean into that was what he would say. He didn't say leave ESPN, which would not have been good discernment, I don't think. He just said, lean into that and the Lord will show you where to go. And it was really the first time in my life that I was directly seeking God for a clear path. And it felt like I was on a roller coaster. When it was over, though, and I can look back now, it was a clear path. But when you're
Well, it's
in
always
it,
that
you're like you're on a
perspective to
roller
look
coaster.
to
Yeah.
look back. And the hard part, the note I made thinking about this was, and I joke about, because it looks perfectly clear when you look back on it. It's like, well, why didn't I see that then? But when you're in the middle of it, I mean, I catch myself going, God, a burning bush would be good right here. Just to pop up and say, here's what we're going to do, and this is how you're going to do it.
It's a GPS. Could you just tell me where we're going? Let me plug it in, and you tell me the destination, how long it's going to take, and I'll drive the road that you want me to, even if it's a little windy, to get there. I didn't have a destination. Ultimately, my destination was Jesus, but I didn't have a clear path on how to get to where I was going. But it's fun when you walk in faith and when you reach out to people and you step out and you start to have conversations and even just, ask how people are doing. You never know what the Lord's going to do to open up a door. And that was an amazing door to have open. And I just knew it was not easy to make the decision. I took a massive pay cut. There was no guaranteed money, if you will, like we hear about in sports. It was a 1-year contract to go work for Sports Spectrum. And I felt like it was still the right move to make, even though it made 0 sense from a worldly perspective.
What was you said you reached out to some trusted people, your circle. What were the conversations like with your family?
Great question.
When you were going through that?
Well, my wife was the first person to certainly start that conversation with. And initially, when I started even bringing it to her, it was probably before I brought it to everybody else. And she even said the words, it's not time yet, I don't think. This was even before I got the Mike and Mike job. I was kind of like, this is not a great time to be at ESPN. Maybe I should just get out of here. And she just kept saying, no, it's not the right time, because that's easy to leave when things aren't good. She's like, just hang in there. I think God's got something great. And she was really smart in the sense of seeking the Lord, which is what she said. But then when I came back to her the second time with an actual offer and a role to go to Sports Spectrum, we had a lot of questions and conversations over that, because 40% less than what you're currently making, when you're in your 40s and you have a daughter who's in middle school and eventually high school and college, it didn't make a lot of sense. And when you're doing a career change like that, in the middle of a place that if you were able to stay for the rest of your career, you'd be set for life when you retire, because it's all the things that ESPN and Disney would bring you as far as that goes. But also, I didn't really see this, but the Lord protected me, I believe, because ESPN went through a ton of layoffs and changes right after I left. I did not know they were coming, and I left when I left. It was on my own deal and nobody else's. But I think the Lord protected me, and it was part of those conversations with my wife really helped. When I told my brothers, I have 2 younger brothers, they were on board. They were just very supportive, which is great. My mom, very supportive. My dad was going through some stuff at the time, so I really didn't speak to him too much. He didn't really understand, but he trusts that I was making the right move for me and my family. And, that's really what I just wanted to follow the Lord's direction. And if I was not following the Lord's direction, and if that was If leaving ESPN was not following the Lord's direction, I don't think I would have ever left. But I really believe that it was. And now, again, 9 years, 10 years later, I can look back and clearly see that it was.
I went through the same thing this past year when I made the decision to get out of on the floor coaching and move into this consulting role and doing some different, but it's freed up some opportunities to speak at churches and to teach a class. I never had the opportunity before because you were doing that. But I struggled with, is this because this is what Greg wants to do? Or is this really God nudging and and leading me that way? And that's always the tuggle I had and still have at times. Like, well, was this really the best thing to do?
That's the prayer, Greg, that I pray every day, even to this day. Lord, I always say, am I going to be selfish or am I going to be obedient? Let me discern the voice of you to be obedient and not selfish, because the voice of Jason wants to do a lot of things and does do a lot of things. And ultimately, that's a selfish mode that I enter into, even if it's a good thing that I'm doing. I really, really want to discern the voice of God over the voice of myself. And it's a battle. Like, it's a constant battle. I mean, even to this moment, as I speak with you, there's things that I'm thinking about and contemplating that I'm like, is that from you, God? Or is that me wanting to contemplate this? So it's the constant battle, I think, especially as followers of Christ, that we all want to discern, is God's voice versus our own. And my answer is always just go back to scripture and get into prayer, and then find the wise counsel and keep those three things in its circular motion constantly. And usually it works out the way it should.
Talking about sports or working in the corporate world or whatever, I had a Bible professor at Lipscomb, Dr. Lavender, always talked about he called it the secular sacred divide, and he would draw a line down the board, and he would have you throw out random things, from like, driving your car or just getting to work. I just work, I'm an accountant at a hospital. So, and he would say, so that would be secular. And they're like, yeah. And he goes, now going to church would be sacred. So, he would trick us into dividing it up. And then, as he would take us through it, he would erase that line, that there is no divide.
All together. Yep.
All together. How do you, as you speak at different conferences and things, and you're speaking to athletes and coaches and administrators who I would think have to battle that daily of making sure that they are living out the mission. And you said not only the mission of just being in alignment myself, but of bringing others to Christ. What does that look like?
What's that look like? My gosh, I kind of default a lot to what I do in my church, which is young adults ministry. I lead a young adults ministry with my wife. In fact, tonight, Thursday night, as we record this, I'll be teaching out of the book of Acts. It's Acts 4, and we'll go through the Bible study. And I love young people because they're 18 to 30. So the 18-year-old to 22-year-old is still in college, and the 23-year-old to the 29-year-old is in the workforce trying to figure out life. Sometimes they're married, maybe they have kids, some of them are single. They're all over the place. And getting them to understand that everything that they do it unto the Lord, like it says in Colossians, is a real thing. And they have a very hard time separating the personal ambitions that they want to go after and do and the Christ following person that they want to be. Very difficult time. And again, it's just part of maturation, right? Like, the older we get, the more we can look back and say, I'm so glad I wasn't, I'm not like that as much now as I was then. But I get it. I was in my 20s once many years ago, and I was completely chasing after all the things that I wanted to chase after. I was 27 when I started following Jesus. So like, I was 27 years of my life without the Lord. I was all about me. So now, even to this day, understanding, and I miss it. I miss it so many times. There's so many moments where I have gone to the grocery store, or gone somewhere out, or even my wife and daughter and I are just walking around, in a downtown area or something for a nice walk. And there was a moment, right? There was an opportunity to be salt and light to somebody, and I miss it. And I'm like, geez, everything you do it unto the Lord. Everything you do it unto the Lord. That doesn't mean everything that you do in ministry, do it unto the Lord. Well, duh, right? Like, that's what we're supposed to do if you're working in ministry. But no, everything that you do it unto the Lord. And I don't know if I'm still there fully, Greg, to be honest with you. Like, when I go out for a walk sometimes in the morning, I already have spent time, let's say, praying, and then I go for my walk, And that's not a prayer walk. That's a, let me listen to some sports podcast to hear what they think about the game last night. Am I doing that unto the Lord? But I do think there's a point where if we get so so consumed and bottled up with thinking about everything, and gosh, I missed it here and I missed it here, we're gonna drive ourselves nuts. And that's where the wonderful grace and mercy of our Lord comes in. And we have to be like, oh, he knows we're not perfect and we're gonna mess up. Receive the grace, receive the mercy, and renew your mind every day in Christ Jesus. Do the best that you can going forward. But it's okay. If we miss the mark, it's okay. Just get up and keep pushing towards him. So that's kind of what I try to do each and every day.
Well, you talk about teaching that class. That's similar to the class I teach. That's a post-college. So they're 22 to 30. And that's the part I've coached for so long with athletes. And it's
I love that
such a big transition. They've got and that class is singles, newlyweds, engaged. It's the whole bunch and 35, 50 people in there. But we talk a lot about the mindset, and your mindset and belief sets the whole thing in action, because those are your words and your thoughts, and then enough actions become habits, character, destiny. We've all heard that, but it has to keep going back to my mindset and being intentional with that. And you mentioned Dungy was kind of the tipping point for you, or at least that was the first nudge. Yeah. What was it that he said, or how did that conversation come? Because I don't think he just came in and said it. There had to be a growth of that. Can you walk back through that? Because I talk a lot about in that class, like, there's opportunities as an accountant, there's opportunities as a coach or whatever to minister. And I think that's what obviously Dungy did in some point there.
100%. It's 2010. I'm a talent producer at ESPN. So I'm basically a booking producer. So I would book the guests to be on all the different shows. And I booked Tony Dungy to come to ESPN to promote his book, The Mentor Leader, one of my favorite books. Great book. If you're a leader, read that book. And his assistant, Jessica, was the publicist that I was working with to bring Coach Dungy to Bristol to do the ESPN range of shows. We call it the car wash. And Jessica knew that I was a follower of Christ. We had worked in some projects previously, so she knew my faith. So she clearly told Coach Dungy that I was a Christian, because after he does the first interview of the day on Mike and Mike, we end up in the green room, just a little side room hanging out, and we have about 15 or 20 minutes. And so Coach Dungy in that moment takes a second to get to know me, which was wonderful. He didn't have to do that. Most athletes could care less who I am. I was just the guy taking them around and coaches. But Coach Dungy cared about every single person that he came in contact with. And he said, Jason, it's nice to meet you. Tell me more about you. Told him about, being married, having a kid, all that. And he says, hey, Jessica tells me you're a follower of Christ. I'm like, yeah, I love the Lord, Coach. And he goes, so let me ask you a question. And this is the tipping point. He goes, how do you live your faith out in the workplace here at ESPN, Jason? And I had never been asked that question. I had no idea how to answer it. And I looked at him and I said, can you do that? I don't even know how to do that, Coach. And he looked at me like I just disappointed, like I was a child that disappointed their parent. And he just kind of shook his head for a minute and said, look where you work. Of course you can. And before he could go any further, Jessica gets in front of him, the assistant, and she looks at me with her hands on her hips like a stern mom who is, yelling at their kids when they come home late for dinner or something. And she says, Jason, you don't even get what Coach is saying. And this took a lot of boldness for Jessica. I'm still friends with her today, and she's just not like that. So I think back to this story and I'm like, this is really a moment where she felt convicted too, because she looked at me and she goes, you don't even understand what Coach is saying. He's asking you how you live out your faith, because look at where you work. There's 4,000 people at ESPN. Look at the light that you can be in this place, that you can bring Jesus into this place every single day by the way that you care for people, by the way that you care about your own work. It was Colossians 3 to a T. I just didn't know the scriptures as well, clearly back then. And I was kind of dumbfounded, but then the light bulb went on after that. And so after they left, it took about a year, but I really started to understand that I went from being an ESPN producer who happened to follow Jesus to being a follower of Christ who happened to work at ESPN. It goes back to what we said earlier about the identity. You get those things in its proper order and things start to align a lot better. And for me, that changed everything. That was the tipping point on understanding that Jesus was first in everything. He wasn't just a piece of my life, he was the centerpiece of everything that I do. And that includes my job at ESPN, because for years, church was kind of here on Sundays, Bible study, middle of the week, family time, and then ESPN. And I would say ESPN was a larger part of that pie, right? That puzzle. And I didn't have them all aligned like your professor did in understanding the sacred and the secular. They all overlap with each other. And it changed my mind. It changed my mind. It changed my spirit, and it changed my life. I tell people forever, because then it really helped me understand where my identity was found. And whether I worked at ESPN, Sports Spectrum, the church, wherever I was a follower of Christ first.
So that question from Dungy and his assistant was almost like a Romans 12:2 moment. That was the renewing of your mind, which changed your mindset, which led to
Absolutely. Be not what is it? Be not conformed to the patterns of this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. And that renewing took place, or began at least, on that day. I wish I could go back to 2001 when my brother was the first to lead me to Jesus and say that was when it really started. And it was, because without him doing that, who knows where I'd be today. But Coach Dungy it's discipleship, right? It's being discipled and the sanctification process of being a follower of Christ. Without even realizing it, one of the greatest Pro Football Hall of Fame coaches of all time is at ESPN, in essence, helping me in my sanctification and discipling me by helping me understand what proper order I needed to keep my job as a follower of Christ.
Well, I just think too, the fact that he asked that question took a lot.
Totally.
And it's not and obviously it's not the first time he's asked that question.
It's not.
And that's fascinating to me. And,
Greg,
too,
go ahead. I'm sorry.
No, you go ahead.
I want to just jump in and say this about Coach Dungy. I've been able to become friends with him since then. So 15 years, I've known him now. We've spoken at multiple conferences together. I've interviewed him 5 or 6 times. Whenever I finally got one chance to share that story that I just shared with you from the stage at a conference with Coach Dungy in attendance about 3 or 4 years ago. And we talked after, and I'm like, do you remember that day? He goes, well, I remember being with you. And I remember asking the question, but I don't remember your response and the impact and Jessica and all that. I'm like, yeah, it changed my life, Coach. I truly mean that. And he was just so, I think, encouraged as he continued to work at NBC, as he did for many years, to continue to seek the Lord first in wherever he was going. So it was awesome.
And just the fact that because he could have asked you about the weather or, whatever it was to fill those 10 minutes in that green room, but that was, it triggered for him. And, we actually did a men's study on that book, but now it makes it even different when you go, it wasn't just a book put together. This is who he is.
It's who he is. Incredible.
Do you try to be intentional with that same question now?
I try. It's weird because I'm not in the secular space as much anymore in my journey, because I work in ministry. And if there's one thing besides obviously the resources that you get from working at an ESPN, if there's one thing I miss when people have asked me about, like, what do you miss from working there? I would say I miss the opportunity to be around a lot of non-Christians. Not that I'm trying to like save them and I look at them as projects for Christ. That was not how I approached my job or approached people I worked with. We had a job to do and I wanted to do it well, but I miss being able to introduce conversations in a way like Coach Dungy did with me. So, hey, you got I go to church on Sundays. What do you do on Sundays? Just talking to people about who they are. I'm around Christians all the time now, which is great. I love to be around the flock and the body of Christ, if you will. But, when I meet people, whether it's on an airplane or, maybe it's a grocery store, or see somebody from, my past that I know aren't believers, I do have a special place in there for them. I don't know if it's as intentional of a question, the way Coach Dungy asked it, how do you live your faith out? I guess being around Christians, I probably should ask that question more to those at my church who work in, secular industries. Like, hey, what's that look like for you? Because I know the struggle that it was for me.
Well, and that comes up in our class quite a bit about they don't know they don't know what they don't know. So a lot of times it's a question like, well, how do I take this Romans verse or this Colossians verse, and how do I take it to, at my job making widgets right here with people who may not be followers, or we're not even supposed to talk about these things. And so but that one question in a different, maybe it's at lunch or whatever else, could be
It could
life
be a game.
changing.
It could be a game changer. It's funny because I've shared on this topic, sharing your faith in the workplace or whatever that might look like, a few times at my church, and certainly, in some other conferences and men's gatherings, I've shared about this topic because it is a hot topic. And I think a lot of men don't really either see their work as ministry or see an opportunity where they could, because it's just so toxic, or there's so many non-Christians or whatever in the place. How do you do that? And, I always start with, be really, really good at your work first. Like, do the best job that you can. Autograph your work with excellence, as the trophy says. Like, really do your work well, because they're not going to want to care about what you have to say if you're a slacker. So if you do your work well, you've already gained. I think athletes see this really as a way. Like, if you're a top athlete and you are a follower of Christ and you're really, really good at what you do, you've earned the respect to be able to talk about matters of faith with some of your teammates or people in your work. 100% credibility, right? Like, the top of the top athletes, you see it in the World Cup with soccer as we're recording this. Like, there's so many top of the line athletes in soccer that are being open about their faith, and it's received because of the credibility. It's a Tim Tebow effect, as I call it. As Tebow started to have a lot of success, and he's obviously doing great things post playing career, he was earning the credibility to be able to talk openly about his faith. And so be great at what you do. But the second thing I always say is, okay, make sure that you are loving and serving your team well. If you are complaining all the time, even if you're doing great work, or if you're just in a bad mood, or you're treating people, like crap, even if you're doing great work, that's not a great representation of Jesus. In 2 Corinthians 5, it talks about being ambassadors for Christ in verse 20. And so God is making his appeal through you, through me, Greg, to be reconciled to him. So what does that mean if we're an ambassador? That means wherever we go, especially in our workplace, that might be the only Jesus that people ever see, is through us. And so I tell people all the time, like, do your work great, love and serve and care your teammates. If you do those two things, you're going to have opportunities to talk about your faith. You just are, because it's going to flow out of you, and people are going to say, tell me more about you and why you're this way. And now you have an open door, like it says in 1 Peter 3, to give a reason for the hope that's within you.
Well, Coach Meyer would always talk to us about being a conduit and just passing that on through.
Yep.
With that.
Yeah,
well, I could do this for hours, and I want to respect your time, but I really appreciate that from a selfish standpoint, because I've battled some of the same things, and we run in some of the same circles with athletes and coaches and young adults right now, and they carry over. If there's one principle that you picked up on that you try to carry out and make sure, if you speak at an event or something, is there one point that you want to make sure that you carry through or point out to people?
Yeah, I think, especially now as I'm older, in my early 50s, I try to tell people all the time, like, it's worth it if you're chasing after Jesus. Hang in there. Like, it's just so many young people. This is where my young adults ministry comes into play. When one thing goes wrong, they think God hates them, and they just veer away. And I've seen the slow drift or the slow fade in so many of these young people, and it pains me and it saddens me to see it, because they aren't seeing the forest through the trees. They're just seeing the trees in front of them, and they have no idea what the next 20 to 30 years are going to look like, but they want to know, and we're never going to know. But stay the course. Like, please stay the course. Trust me, it's going to be okay in the end if you stay the course. And it's a different time today than it was when I was in my 20s or teens, and it's different for you too. We are in a completely different digital age of access and technology and social media and everything being at our fingertips. Even the Bible, people are reading the Bible on their phones. It's incredible. Millions upon billions of people on the YouVersion app. But Greg, I still got a real Bible right here. Like, I need to read my Bible, because if I go on my phone, it's going to distract me from everything else that the phone can bring and distract me with. So it's just stay the course. Like there's going to be a lot of distractions. There's going to be a lot of disappointments. There's going to be a lot of zigs and zags and twists and turns. Relationships are a big thing with young people. Who am I going to marry? What's that going to look like? Stay the course and trust in the Lord. It's really Proverbs 3, which is my life verse, 5 and 6. Trust in the Lord with all your heart and lean not on what you think in your own understanding, and in all your ways acknowledge and follow him, and he will make your path straight. And the straight path, as we talked about in the beginning, is not a straight line. It's a windy road that ultimately is a straight path.
It is a straight, yeah. We talked about, and I'll finish up here. We talked about in our class last week how you talk about perseverance or endurance and patience. And Paul was talking about that. And we talked about the fact that patience is relational with people. And to your point, that perseverance or that endurance is through circumstances. And like you said, is to stay the course through those circumstances and then be patient with the people who might be in the way during that. And
Yes.
That's a fascinating way to close up here. Jason, let us know how where we can follow you for Sports Spectrum, for your podcast, for best way to contact, how we can reach out.
Yeah, I would say, social media, as in the age of 2026, that's where the best places are. I love to be on Twitter and Instagram. Twitter is more for it's kind of my newspaper of kind of getting a feel of what's going on in the world of sports and the world of news. I try to block out the news side of things because it's toxic right now. Try to grow in my faith and follow people who can encourage me that way. But I love Instagram too, and I love what's going on there when you can share. If you can get the algorithm right, you can really get some really great encouragement from some people on Instagram. So people can find me there. And for Sports Spectrum, I would encourage them to go to the website, sportspectrum.com. Maybe they can check out our magazine, which is the only thing that we have for sale. So they can go get to the Sports Spectrum magazine, which is a quarterly magazine. And it's perfect for kids. And I think it's $24. So it's not an insane amount of money. And it's one of the best things that we do. Check out our podcasts. We have a bunch of podcasts that we get to be a part of too. So lots of great conversation. Sportspectrum.com is probably the best place to go.
Okay. Hey, thanks again so much. We could do this for hours, but I appreciate it and look forward to listening to it here soon.
Yeah, you are welcome. Thanks for inviting me on. Appreciate it.